What if gratitude is not a polite reaction you offer after something good happens, but the quiet frequency you tune to that sets everything in motion? What if, beneath the words and lists, there is a lived vibration, a felt radio station inside you that once held begins to reconfigure possibilities around you? This is the claim at the heart of the Seth material, as channeled by Jane Roberts. Gratitude, when felt as a genuine energetic state, acts like a key that unlocks the field of potential. I want to walk with you through that idea, what it means, how it shows up in the body and the brain, why it changes what you notice and attract, and how you can begin to embody it so it actually shifts the weather of your life. Along the way, I'll share practical somatic practices inspired by these teachings, simple ways to translate a concept into a lived experience. If what you hear resonates, tap subscribe and check the description for links to the Seth Speaks material and suggested readings. Most of us have been taught gratitude as an after-the-fact courtesy. We keep lists, we count blessings when things settle, we say thank you for a gift. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a different way to understand gratitude, not as an effect of circumstances, but as an intentional state that precedes them. Imagine two people waking into the same morning. One begins with a checklist of complaints and obligations. The other, before anything changes outwardly, holds a small inner posture of appreciation. Not airy optimism, but a grounded sense of thankfulness for being alive, for breath, for the small detail of light on a table. They live through the same day, yet the second person is more likely to notice opportunities, feel connected in brief encounters, and respond instead of react in tense moments. The reason is not magic. It is a change in the internal atmosphere that alters perception and behavior and invites different responses back from life. When Jane Roberts channeled Seth, he spoke often about how your inner state is not merely descriptive, it is creative. That doesn't mean you wave a wand and outcomes drop into place. It means your internal vibration, the harmony of thought, emotion, and bodily resonance, forms a signal. The world you experience is not independent from that signal. The metaphor that helps here is radio. You are broadcasting from within. The field around you is full of stations, possible experiences, relationships, images, openings. If your internal tuner is slipping between static and station, you receive noise. If you align to the frequency of gratitude, steady, coherent, warm, you begin to pick up channels that match that frequency, synchronicities, helpful people, ideas that land as if they were already meant for you. Why is gratitude different when it's a felt vibration instead of a list of facts? Because words without feeling are like batteries with no charge. You can say, "I am grateful," and mean it in a polite, intellectual way. The muscles around your heart don't necessarily register it. Your nervous system might remain contracted, and the chemistry of your body barely shifts. But when gratitude is embodied, felt in the chest, breathed into, taken into the marrow, it reorganizes more than you're thinking. It changes rhythm. Consider the heart. The heart is not just a pump. It emits electrical and magnetic signals that can be measured meters away, and it communicates with the brain in ways that alter attention and emotional tone. Some researchers, including those associated with coherence research like HeartMath, describe how when the heart's rhythm becomes more ordered, when it moves from jagged, stress-driven patterns to smooth, coherent waves, the entire nervous system registers safety. This is not a wholesale scientific endorsement of metaphysical claims about reality. It is a physiological observation that coherent heart rhythms correlate with clarity, improved decision-making, and a calmer emotional landscape. Interpreted through the lens of the Seth material, that calmer, coherent physiology becomes the ground from which creative responses emerge. It can be helpful to imagine the heart as a tuning fork. When you strike a tuning fork and hold it near another one tuned to the same pitch, the second fork begins to vibrate. Emotions, like frequencies, have the ability to entrain. Hold appreciation in your chest and your nervous system will begin to harmonize. Your perception sharpens. You think less from fear and more from curiosity, and curiosity in turn notices openings that fear would have overlooked. At the level of the brain, your imagination and feeling can shift neurochemistry. When you vividly imagine something, not as a distant abstract hope, but as if it's already present, dopamine pathways and other neuromodulators subtly shift, affecting motivation and attention. The language scientists use is cautious. Research suggests that vivid imagination and positive affect can prime the brain to pursue different actions, to consolidated learning, and to form networks of expectation. In practical terms, that means feeling gratitude before evidence can change how you move, who you notice, and the kinds of risks you're willing to take. That change in behavior and perception is often where synchronicity shows up. We must hold a careful boundary here. When I speak about the field of possibilities, or the quantum field as Seth often does in metaphor, I do not mean to claim a settled physical mechanism whereby consciousness rearranges particles at will. The word quantum in this context is best heard as a bridge, a poetic and interpretive model that links what we know about how observation and measurement interact in physics to the experiential fact that attention and expectation shape perception and action. Think of it less as a laboratory explanation and more as a map that helps you orient. The field is vast, possibilities coexist, and your coherent state helps you notice and inhabit those threads that resonate with you. So how do you move from the idea to the embodied practice? Here are 3 simple, repeatable micro-practices. These are not spells. They are entry points to change the internal climate where new things can grow. Begin with a morning heart breath ritual. Before you leap into the day, bring your hands gently to the area over your heart. Close your eyes if that feels safe. Breathe down into the chest. Notice the physical sensation of expansion beneath your palms. Instead of listing things you think you should be grateful for, open to one small particular detail. The warmth of a cup, the fact of being able to taste, a memory of someone's smile. Let that detail be vivid enough that it stirs a sensation in your chest, a softness, a release. If a thought distracts you, return to the breath and the felt sense. This is not about counting blessings as a duty. It is about aligning your body to a signal. Do this for a few breaths, long enough to feel a subtle shift in the internal weather. Notice how the rest of your attention follows. Midday, when the day's friction tries to draw you into reactivity, practice a micro shift. Anchor your awareness inside the sternum for a heartbeat. Take one breath that is directed inward, as if you are breathing into the chest instead of the belly. Remember a small kindness someone offered you. Feel it trace through your body. Hold that posture for a moment and then let it inflow into your day. These many interruptions recalibrate the baseline. Over time, particularly if done repeatedly, they create a new norm for what your default level of voltage feels like, a quieter, more receptive hum instead of a static of fear and scarcity. In the evening, practice an appreciation that listens rather than insists. Lie down or sit in a quiet corner. Let the mind move through the day without the task of judging it. Instead, notice 2 or 3 moments that supplied tiny nourishment, a phrase that landed well, a stretch that eased, a moment you showed kindness to yourself. Breathe into each one and let the body say thank you in sensation, a softening of the throat, a slight exhale that releases tension. As you do this, make a small note to yourself, mental, written, or both, of one way you witnessed your internal state shifting. The point is to close the loop. You began the day by tuning the heart. You shifted midday when interrupted. You now notice and reinforce how small coherences have woven into the fabric of your day. These practices are brief and portable, but their power lies in repetition and fidelity. Think of them like gently steering a boat on a wide river. You do not change the current with one oarstroke, but frequent deliberate corrections keep you headed in a different direction over time.
The river is habit. The oars are your felt practices. To illustrate how subtle shifts can have outsized effects, let me tell you 2 brief, plausible stories, not to promise results, but to make the mechanism feel real. A young artist had a pattern. Every time she completed a piece, she rushed to find validation outside, social media likes, sales, feedback. The rush to external confirmation put her in a loop of anxious scrutiny, and gradually, creative risk diminished. She began to experiment instead with a morning heart breath ritual before sitting at the easel. She breathed into a simple gratitude for the fact that her hands could hold a brush, and for colors that surprised her. The practice didn't instantly make her famous, but what changed was inner permission. She took bolder risks, allowed color experiments, and noticed people began to respond to the more alive work. Doors opened that felt aligned with her process, not just her results. This is a practical example of how internal coherence alters attention and action, which then loops back into external opportunity. A man with a strained relationship to his sister found himself habitually defensive. He tried to fix it with apologies that felt thin and rehearsed, so nothing really shifted. When he began a practice of midday micro-shifts, he learned to notice the prick of his own reactivity in real time, the tightening of his jaw, the shallow breath. Instead of lashing out, he shifted his attention to something small he could appreciate about the sister, an old kindness, a laugh she once shared. That felt appreciation softened his body and changed the tonal quality of his response. Over time, their conversations moved from sparring matches to tentative repair. Again, there's no deterministic formula here. People's lives are complicated. But coherent physiology and felt appreciation open different neural pathways for relating. As you practice, you'll notice that gratitude as frequency is less about forcing a smile and more about recalibrating the whole system. It's an embodied orientation that values sensation over mere words. Words matter, language shapes intent, but they are shallow unless the body follows. In fact, one of the common pitfalls people report is trying to fake it with affirmations. Reciting phrases while the body tenses under the surface often creates dissonance. The nervous system detects the mismatch. A better strategy is to use small, credible memories or sensory details that reliably produce feeling. The warmth of sunlight on the wrist, the smell of coffee, the remembered tone of a friend's voice. These particulars create a real felt state that can sustain itself. We said earlier that gratitude moves the body from chaotic rhythms to coherence. What does this look like practically? In stress, the heart's rhythm often shows sharp accelerations and irregular patterns. In a state of appreciation, the rhythm smooths into waves that the brain reads as safety. That safety releases cortisol's grip, reduces muscular tension, improves digestion, and opens cognitive flexibility. The word coherence here is shorthand for a constellation of physiological changes that support better decision-making and emotional regulation. Again, the scientific language must be used carefully. Studies suggest correlations between heart coherence and improved cognitive and emotional outcomes. These findings support practices that cultivate coherent states, but they are not a miraculous causal certificate. Instead, they offer a plausible mechanism through which a felt state could influence what you notice and how you act. One metaphor that helps is the river and the dam. Fear and scarcity are like a dam that creates pressure and turbulence upstream. They shape where the water goes and how it flows. Gratitude, practiced as a felt frequency, loosens the dam, not in one moment, but through repeated small openings. The water begins to flow in more nourishing channels. This doesn't mean the obstacles vanish overnight. It means your choices, your attention, and your nervous system gradually reorganize the way energy moves through your life. We must also pay attention to the language we use around manifestation. Some interpret phrases like, "you create your reality," as blame. If something bad happens, it must be because you didn't vibrate correctly. That interpretation runs counter to the compassionate spirit of Seth's teachings. The practical approach is not about moralizing outcomes or blaming suffering. It's about empowering you with tools that shift probability and perception, while holding that life contains events beyond any one person's control. Kindness and discernment are crucial. Use practice to enlarge your capacity, not as a warrant to deny the complexity of human experience. Now let's bring this into a slightly longer guided practice that moves you from concept into felt coherence. This is a manageable extension of the morning ritual, a practice you can return to when you want to deepen the signal. Place one hand on your heart and the other on your lower belly. Close your eyes if that helps. Breathe naturally for a moment and notice the quality of your breath. Without forcing anything, let the inhale be slightly softer, the exhale a bit longer. Direct your attention to one small, precise detail that evokes appreciation, the texture of a remembered conversation, the pattern of light on a window, the way your feet feel rooted. Allow the detail to become sensory, not the abstract idea of "I have things to be grateful for," but the concrete living memory of a sound, a color, a touch. Notice where that feeling sits in the chest. If your mind wanders, gently return to that sensory memory and to the rhythm of your breath. After several cycles, widen the field. Feel the warmth of the chest expand a finger's width in all directions. Imagine that warmth as a soft golden light.
Not a bright, forced light, but the color of late afternoon sun. Let that light radiate from the chest into the shoulders, down the arms, into the belly. Breathe into that radiance and let it ground you. When you open your eyes, try to keep a trace of that warmth as you move forward. Why the sensory emphasis? Because the nervous system is not persuaded by arguments. It is altered by experience. Repeat, and that trace becomes a baseline. A common question is, how long before this actually changes something outside? There is no fixed timetable. For some people, shifts happen quickly. A chance meeting, a new idea, a reconciliatory call. For others, the changes are subtle, manifesting months later as a different pattern of choices that accumulate. Seth's view, as translated by Jane Roberts, suggests that timing is flexible. Possibilities are always present. Your state determines which ones you enter into. The practical upshot is to practice without demanding immediate proof. Hold gratitude as an orientation, not a contract. It's important to speak directly about the word miracle. People sometimes expect public declarations of transformation overnight. In Seth's narrative, what we call miracles are often synchronistic realignments, where internal coherence meets opportunity. A miracle might be a chance conversation at exactly the right time, an insight arriving from an unexpected source, or a physical improvement that accompanies sustained psychological change. These are not guarantees. They are plausible outcomes when attention, feeling, and action are brought into harmony. As you continue to practice, begin to notice the quality of your attention. Gratitude as a frequency tends to widen perception. You see more affiliatory cues in others, you are more likely to make small offers of kindness, and you are less likely to overinterpret ambiguous behavior as threat. That widening feeds back into your world by creating better relational conditions. In this way, internal coherence produces external effects through a chain: felt state, different attention, different action, different feedback. Before we move forward, let's do a compact midday microshift that you can use anywhere. Wherever you are, place a hand on your heart, soften the brow, and remember a single small kindness you received in the last week. Let that memory amplify into a warm sensation in the chest. Take one breath that is primarily into that space, and then resume what you were doing. This short reset interrupts the drift toward contraction and orients you to a frequency that invites possibility. One more vignette. A woman in midlife who had been blocked in writing found that her old strategy of trying to will the words created a tightness that kept inspiration away. She began a nightly practice of reflecting on 3 moments of the day that moved her, however small. The practice changed her internal weather. She began to write with less force and more curiosity. Over months, clients began to notice a new voice in her work and invited her into collaborative opportunities. Again, this is not a causal magic trick. It is a demonstration of how an internal shift can alter perception, approach, and therefore outcomes. As you explore these ideas, remain grounded in ethics and practicality. If you are navigating medical, psychological, or financial crises, seek professional guidance. Practices of gratitude support resilience and clarity, but do not replace targeted care. Use these tools to accompany practical steps: therapy, medical treatment, financial planning, not as substitutes. At this point, you may be asking, how does this all scale? How do individual micro-practices add up to the claim in the title, that gratitude unlocks the universe? The answer unfolds in layers. First, at the level of individual physiology, consistent heart-centered coherence makes you less reactive and more available for creative choice. Second, at the level of perception, coherent attention opens you to possibilities that scarcity-focused attention misses. Third, at the level of action, those new perceptions lead to different behaviors and relationships. When enough small shifts accrue, they rearrange the context you live in. You notice different doors, you meet different people, you take different steps. Seth's language invites you to imagine that the field of potential is responsive to these changes. Scientifically, we can say that probability spaces are altered by changed attention and decision patterns. Both accounts point to the same practical result. Shift your internal signal and you shift the pattern of experience. There's a deeper element to this that the Seth material often presses. Gratitude is not merely for pleasant things. It is a posture that includes the complexity of life. Holding gratitude for the breath in the midst of grief doesn't minimize suffering. It widens the container in which grief can be processed. This is essential because if gratitude becomes an escape route from difficulty, it loses integrity. Authentic gratitude can coexist with sorrow, and that coexistence is often the doorway to deeper resilience. Now, imagine you've been practicing the morning ritual, the microshifts, the evening anchor for several weeks. You begin to notice subtle things: a conversation that flows more easily, an idea landing with more confidence, an unexpected helper appearing in a moment of need. These are not always dramatic, but they accumulate into a felt sense that the field has become less opaque and more responsive. Seth would say that you have become a clearer transmitter. The field, being sensitive to that clarity, returns correspondingly. Whether you phrase that in metaphysical terms or psychological behavioral terms, the lived experience is what matters. Before we enter the next layer, how to sustain deep coherence in sustained stress, and how to navigate the ethical dimensions of manifestation, let's pause and integrate the practices so far. Place your hands on your heart now, and recall one small detail of today's life that felt nourishing. Hold it in your chest and breathe into it, allowing the sensation to expand gently. Do this without forcing brightness or pushing past discomfort. Feel into the balance of softness and strength. When you open your eyes, notice any subtle changes in posture, in the set of the shoulders, or in the way you want to move. One of the tensions we will explore next is how to maintain this practice in the face of trauma, hardship, or systemic barriers. realities that are not simply dissolved by a warm feeling. Embodied gratitude must be paired with clear action, community support, and an honest reckoning with social realities. Gratitude does not mean complacency. It can fuel a courageous engagement with life. Before we move into that terrain, I want to re-emphasize the source of these ideas. The approach we've been tracing draws on the Seth material as channeled by Jane Roberts, an invitation to treat inner states as creative forces and to cultivate the felt qualities that open new possibilities. If you want to explore the original channelings and contexts, the description includes links to the Seth Speaks and recommended readings. Credit to Seth and Jane for the metaphysical scaffolding that inspire these practices. My role here is to translate those ideas into accessible, body-centered routines you can try. There is a natural tension between the poetic metaphors, tuning forks, rivers, golden light, and the sober care with which we must handle claims about health and material outcomes. The middle path is to hold both. The poetic helps you feel the possibility. The practical helps you act ethically and effectively. In the next section, we will look at how to deepen coherence when life feels chaotic, how to avoid the trap of toxic positivity, and how to use gratitude as a compass rather than a bandage. We'll also explore a slightly longer embodied practice to help stabilize you through prolonged stress, and some cautionary ethics around manifestation, how not to weaponize these teachings against yourself or others. For now, keep the practices alive. Morning heart breath, midday microshift, evening listening. Notice how small moments of appreciation change your seeing. Notice the way your body responds. And remember, this is not about creating pressure to be grateful all the time. It's about learning to make gratitude a reliable instrument in your toolkit, a steady tone you can return to when the static rises. As you sit with that, consider a final question before we proceed. What would shift in your life if you treated gratitude as the first action rather than the final response? Let that question move through the chest as a curiosity. Hold it there as we prepare to go deeper. You've asked what would shift if gratitude were your first move rather than a finishing line. Now let's explore the deeper companion practices, the ethical guardrails, and the ways to sustain this tone when life presses hard. We'll unpack how to hold gratitude alongside grief, how to study the heart during prolonged stress, how to work with resistance when the practice feels fake, and how to widen this into relationships and collective action without turning it into blind optimism. Throughout, remember the origin of these ideas. The Seth material, as channeled by Jane Roberts, provides the metaphysical scaffold. My invitation is to translate that scaffolding into practices you can inhabit, responsibly and practically. First, what do you do when gratitude collides with pain? This is the central test. Gratitude that denies or erases suffering becomes brittle and dangerous. Gratitude that coexists with sorrow becomes a spacious, honest force. Imagine grief as a heavy weather system overhead, and gratitude as a steady lamp you carry inside. The lamp doesn't make the storm vanish, but it changes what you can see within it. When sorrow arrives, start by acknowledging it plainly. Name the sensations in the body, the tightness in the throat, the hollow at the sternum, the way breath becomes thin. Let naming be an act of tenderness, because the nervous system calms when experience is recognized rather than pushed aside. Once acknowledged, invite a tiny, credible element of appreciation into the same field. It may be the fact that breath still moves in and out, the detail of a voice you heard today, the warmth of a mug, or the memory of a kindness. Choose something small enough that it does not feel like a betrayal of grief. Hold both truths. I am carrying pain, and here is a tender detail I can feel. This is not a trick, it is a rewiring of attention so that your system learns to contain complexity. Over time, the capacity to hold opposing tones broadens your regulatory range. You become less likely to collapse into numbness or to overreact into frantic doing. For people with histories of deep trauma, some gratitude practices can initially feel unsafe. If placing a hand on the chest triggers discomfort, adapt. Anchor a palm to the thigh, notice the floor beneath your feet, or simply register the quality of a breath. Trauma-aware practice privileges safety and slow pacing. Work with a clinician or trauma-informed practitioner if needed. Practices that emphasize control or forced positivity can re-traumatize. Instead, orient to curiosity about internal climate. What is present now? Rather than, I must feel better. This posture creates a non-pressured openness where gratitude can, in time, arise naturally. Now, let's look at a longer stabilizing practice designed for sustained chaos, a sturdier ritual you can return to when days feel piled with tasks and threat.
Find a position that feels grounded. You can sit in a chair with both feet on the floor, or lie down if that is safer. Place one hand at the heart and the other where your breathing naturally lands. Soften your face, ease your jaw. Begin by mapping the body. Scan slowly from the head to the feet and notice any zones of contraction. If the chest is tight, imagine it like a room with a shuttered window. Breathe gently toward the shutter, inviting a small loosening. Next, call up one particular thing that, however modest, is true and nourishing. A pet's breath, a patch of sunlight on a kitchen counter, the fact that a neighbor once smiled. Let that detail evoke a quiet warmth inside the chest. When the warmth appears, however gentle, let it expand by imagining a pale golden circle spreading outward, a finger's width around the sternum. Breathe into that circle and sense the shoulders drop by a fraction. If intense emotion arises, allow it to move. Do not try to clamp it down. The golden circle does not erase intensity. It becomes a place to hold it safely. When you conclude, take notice of one micro shift, a softer jaw, a steadier exhale, a slightly altered posture, and name it to yourself. Something eased. Over repeated practice, this ritual increases the nervous system's capacity to return to baseline more rapidly after stress. A complementary practice is what I'll call embodied journaling. After a stabilization ritual, keep a small notebook and write 3 lines, a concrete sensory detail that felt nourishing, one moment where you noticed your reactivity, and one small choice you can make tomorrow that aligns with your values. The aim is not to produce prose, but to create data that helps you see patterns. Over weeks, the notebook becomes evidence of how inner orientation correlates with outer ripples. It also serves as an anchor when doubt creeps in, a tangible record that small coherences compound. Resistance is a faithful companion to any meaningful change. Often it arrives as an internal critic. This is naive. You're being selfish. This won't work. Treat resistance like a cautious friend rather than an enemy. Ask it what it fears. More often than not, resistance shows up to protect you from disappointment or to prevent you from being vulnerable. If the internal voice says you're being self-indulgent, translate that into a practical question. How can I combine gratitude practice with clear action so it doesn't become avoidance? Then answer with a concrete step, a phone call, a task list, a boundary. The combination of felt openness and deliberate action dissolves much of the inner pushback. Another common snag is the sense of inauthenticity. The practice feels staged, the gratitude feels fake. When that happens, shift strategy. Instead of demanding a bright feeling, ask for curiosity. Curiosity is a softer sibling of gratitude that does not require cheerfulness.
Notice something new about the hand you use to hold a cup. Taste the texture of a fragment of food like you had never tasted it before. These micro-observations prime the sensory apparatus and often lead to a quieter, truer gratitude that grows from the ground up rather than from the top down. Let's return briefly to the science-adjacent language in ways that remain humble. Studies associated with heart rhythm coherence indicate correlations between more ordered heart rhythms and improved cognitive function, emotional regulation, and a calmer autonomic nervous system. Research into imagination and predictive coding suggests that what you expect influences what your brain prioritizes. These are not claims that the mind magics material reality at will. They are plausible bridges that explain how internal states alter perception and behavior, which then alter probability spaces. Think of neuroscience as the plumbing and the Seth material as the map of the territory. Both inform a practice that asks you to feel early and act ethically. Now let us think about how to apply this at work, in creative projects, and in relationships, domains where method meets messy human complexity. At work, begin meetings with a 1-minute grounding that doesn't feel forced, an invitation to take a breath, note something that went well, and bring that tone into the room. You'll be surprised how quickly the tonal quality of collaboration shifts when the baseline is less reactivity and more openness. In creative projects, use gratitude to shorten the inner critic's run. Before you begin, place a hand on the heart and register one sensory detail about the medium, the weight of a pen, the hum of a computer fan. Let that detail be the fuel for curiosity. In relationship conversations, notice your physiology first. If your chest tightens, pause and bring attention inward. That pause alone often prevents escalation and opens space for a different response. Ethics must be central to any work about manifestation. An embodied gratitude practice is not a tool to engineer other people's choices or to justify harmful actions in the name of higher vibration. Manifestation that harms others is not aligned with the spirit of these teachings. Use coherence to increase your capacity for empathy, discernment, and responsibility. When you desire a change that affects others, ask, is this aligned with shared well-being? Could my desire harm someone? Are there ways to co-create that consider others' agency? Gratitude practices work best when paired with a moral compass. Let me offer 3 additional vignettes that map different contours of the work, each chosen to highlight nuance rather than triumphalism. A community organizer in an under-resourced neighborhood used heart-based practices to steady a team facing burnout. Instead of treating gratitude as an individual performance enhancer, she invited the group to a short collective ritual before planning sessions. 1 minute to be present to a concrete success from the past week, a parent who attended a workshop, a donated meal, a youth who tried something new. That brief shared attention shifted the tone of meetings from blame and scarcity to possibility and mutual support. Importantly, the rituals didn't replace hard logistical work. Budgets were still balanced, outreach was still executed, but the team's resilience and creativity improved, and that made practical outcomes more probable. A freelance developer was stuck in a grind of chasing clients who undervalued his work. He began a variant of the morning practice focused on capacity rather than immediate results. Gratitude for the capacity to learn, for the clarity of a particular problem solved, for one client who paid on time. This subtle reorientation changed negotiation tone. He stopped accepting projects that drained his bandwidth, began to set clearer boundaries, and attracted clients who matched his pace and values. Networks shifted because his behavior shifted, not because the universe handed him a windfall, but because his coherence altered the kinds of opportunities he noticed and pursued. A caregiver for a chronically ill relative used gratitude practice to stave off compassion fatigue. Each evening, she noted one small thing the patient had smiled at, one moment where she felt present rather than reactive, and one concrete boundary she would hold the next day. This triad prevented the erasure of her own needs and allowed continued compassionate care. Again, the practice did not cure the illness. It preserved the caregiver's capacity to continue. These stories show how gratitude as frequency does practical work. It preserves resourcefulness, enlarges perspective, and changes behavioral thresholds in ways that affect outcomes. A practical question often arises: how do you sustain this work long-term without it becoming rigid ritual? The answer is variety plus check-ins. Ritual stabilizes, variation keeps the nervous system responsive. Rotate your practices. Some mornings do the short heart breath, other mornings do the longer stabilizing ritual. Once a week, do a reflective practice that asks what the practice has done and what adjustments are needed. Use the embodied journal to note patterns. Invite a friend into a practice swap where you exchange brief reflections on what each practice opened. Community accountability, when chosen wisely, supports continuity without dogma. Let's offer a refined daily routine that synthesizes everything into something usable. Begin the day with the morning heart breath. Hands over the chest, breathe into a single small sensory detail. Expand the warmth and carry it into the first activity.
Midday, deploy a microshift whenever tension spikes. A hand to the sternum, a memory of a kindness, one inward breath into the chest. Mid-afternoon, take a short curiosity break. Notice one new thing about your workspace or the sky. Record it if possible. Evening practice, the listening gratitude, where you review the day and note 2 moments of nourishment. Record 1 behavioral insight in your journal. Weekly, do a longer stabilizing practice and a community check-in. Monthly, reflect on what shifted, who you are becoming, what changed in opportunities, and where you need extra practical support or professional help. Now a practical troubleshooting guide for common obstacles. If you plateau and feel no movement after weeks of practice, check for 3 things. Consistency, are you practicing in ways that create frequency? Specificity, are your gratitude anchors sensory and credible? And action alignment, are your choices materially reflecting the internal shift? If the practice feels inert, it is often because it remains too abstract. Make it sensory. If you cry during practice, that is excellent evidence the nervous system is releasing. Let the tears move. If you fall into self-blame because things haven't changed, remind yourself that some patterns require structural or external shifts beyond your immediate control. Gratitude supports your capacity to act wisely in those conditions, but it is not a moral indictment if outcomes are slow. A responsible approach also recognizes social and systemic realities. Practices that work at an individual level are less effective when the environment is structurally oppressive. Gratitude can provide clarity and inner strength, but it does not replace political action, legal recourse, or community organizing. Use inner coherence to fuel informed action, not to accept injustice. The Seth material's emphasis on sovereign consciousness is not an invitation to ignore collective suffering. Rather, it can be a resource for sustained engagement. We should return briefly to language. When to use metaphors like the quantum field. Use them as map, not as proof.
The quantum analogy is useful because it captures a counterintuitive truth. Observation changes the system you observe. In everyday psychology, attention alters what the brain stabilizes as real. Whether you call that quantum mechanics or cognitive neuroscience, the operative fact is the same. Internal tuning matters. Avoid claiming that you can collapse subatomic probabilities to manifest a specific outcome. Instead say, your attention and feeling reshape the probabilities you perceive and the actions you take, and those altered actions feed back into reality. That formulation honors both poetic reach and empirical caution. There's another dimension worth exploring, the role of ritual and imagination in amplifying the felt state. Humans are ritual animals. Acts that consecrate experience have outsized psychological power.
Create a small physical marker for your practice, a stone, a ribbon, a small lamp, and use it solely for your gratitude ritual. The object becomes a cue. The cue fast-tracks the nervous system into the practice state. Pair the object with a brief prelude, 3 breaths, a single sensory anchor, then the expansion. Rituals concentrate attention and make repetition pleasurable rather than rote. Now I want to invite you into one more embodied practice that is a bridge between solitude and action, the intentional sending practice. This is not about forcing outcomes, but about directing coherent attention outward. Sit with hands over the heart. Bring to mind a practical intention that aligns with your values, a conversation you wish to have, a project you want to complete, a small act of service you intend to offer. Instead of rehearsing words or outcomes, place your attention on the felt quality you want to bring into that scenario: steadiness, openness, generosity, clarity. Breathe that quality until you can sense it as a subtle tone in the chest. Imagine it like a tuning note, not a command. Visualize it lightly touching the edges of the situation without needing to micromanage every detail. Then take one practical step in the outer world that aligns with that intention: a short email, a phone call, a draft. The inner tone shapes the approach. The outer action enacts it. Over time, the combination of inner tuning and consistent outer steps creates pathways where previously there were obstacles. As you cultivate these practices, keep a balanced relationship to expectation. Seth's message invites you to become a clearer transmitter, and that is a profound claim. But clarity does not equal omnipotence. Approach the work with humility. You are learning to steward your inner ecology so that life's possibilities are more visible and more tractable. Hold gratitude as a practice of stewardship rather than a magic wand. We are nearing the summit of this exploration, and it's time for a consolidated invitation. Become the vibration you seek. This is not an imperative to abandon the full expanse of human feeling. It is an invitation to choose, repeatedly, to orient from coherence rather than contraction. Let that orientation shape your attention, your small daily acts, your relationships, and your commitments to the world. The field you inhabit responds not with obedience but with resonance. When you study, you notice different doors. When you hold tenderness, others reflect tenderness back. When you combine feeling with ethical action, probabilities align in ways that make new outcomes more possible. To make this concrete, here is a compact weekly template you can adopt. Mornings, focus on the heart breath ritual. Midday, use a micro shift when tension arises. Evenings, practice listening gratitude and record one insight. Weekly, do the longer stabilizing ritual and review your notebook. Monthly, do a community check-in or share practices with a trusted friend. Keep variation so the nervous system stays receptive. If you are in acute distress, medical, psychological, or financial, pair these practices with professional help. Gratitude supports resilience but does not replace targeted care. Before we close, a few final cautions and ethical reminders. Do not weaponize these teachings to blame yourself for external calamity, and do not use them as a reason to avoid taking responsibility in practical domains. When your desire affects others, consult them and align actions with shared consent. Credit the sources that inspire you. The metaphysical scaffolding here comes from Seth as channeled by Jane Roberts, and this work honors that lineage while translating it into contemporary, body-centered practice. If you choose to share these ideas publicly, include source references in your description and avoid suggesting that this is medical or legal advice. Now a brief practice to bring this session into the present. Place one hand lightly over the sternum and the other wherever it feels grounding. Bring to mind one small, credible detail from today that felt nourishing: a flavor, a color, a sound. Let that detail become sensory in your chest. Breathe into it and imagine the warmth as a gentle radiance extending a small distance around the heart. Notice any immediate microchange in posture or in the breath. Carry that sensation with you as you stand, stretch, or return to your day. If you can, make a quick note in your journal, what you felt and one small next step you will take this day that aligns with the feeling.
I want to end with a clear, compassionate restatement of the title that has guided this exploration. The power of gratitude that unlocks the universe is not a promise that life will conform to your desires on command. It is an assertion about alignment. When you cultivate an embodied, coherent tone of appreciation, you change what you perceive, how you act, and therefore what possibilities you can enter into. Seth's material encourages us to treat inner states as creative forces. Science and lived experience suggest that changing your internal chemistry and attention changes the probabilities you engage. Together, these perspectives invite a practical, ethical approach. Tune your heart, act in alignment, serve with discernment. If this material has resonated with you, you can find links to the Seth Speaks channelings and recommended readings in the description below. For those who wish to go deeper with guided translations of Seth's work and practice packs, subscribe to this channel for future sessions.
And before you go, try this. For 1 minute, place a hand over your heart. Recall one small nourishing detail and allow the sensation to expand gently. Notice how you leave this moment changed, even if subtly. Credit and gratitude to Seth and Jane Roberts for the metaphysical vision that inspires this work, and thank you for allowing these ideas into your practice. May your heart become a steady transmitter of clarity, and may that clarity open doors of possibility in ways both subtle and true.